The sky over New York in October was grim, thick clouds blanketing the city as if trying to hide its secrets. From the 90th floor of Harper Global, William Harper, a 40-year-old white American billionaire, looked down upon Manhattan like a king surveying his kingdom. Skyscrapers glittered with lights, stretching like an eternal carpet beneath his feet. But today, the deep blue in William's eyes lacked its usual confidence. His hands, once steady when signing billion-dollar deals, now trembled slightly, gripping the edge of his mahogany desk. William Harper was the embodiment of power. At 40, he had transformed Harper Global, the financial empire built from scratch by his father, into a global giant. From real estate to technology, no industry he touched didn't turn to gold. But behind the perfect exterior, a custom-tailored London suit, brown hair streaked with silver, and a smile that made rivals tread carefully, lay a void that no contract could ever fill. He had no heir, no one to carry on the Harper name or preserve the legacy his father had sacrificed his life to build. The phone on his desk vibrated, breaking William's chain of thought. He glanced at the screen. Dr. Samuel Cohen, the top fertility specialist in New York. He had waited for this call all week, but now he hesitated. His heart pounded, a rare sensation for a man who controlled everything. He pressed the speaker button, his deep voice trying to mask the anxiety. "Dr. Cohen, what's the result?" The doctor's voice on the other end was calm, but each word landed like a hammer to William's chest. "Mr. Harper, I'm very sorry. The results have been confirmed through multiple tests. Your condition is irreversible. You are infertile." Silence. The vast space of the office, with million-dollar paintings on the walls and Persian carpets on the floor, suddenly felt suffocating. William felt the air drain from the room as if he were being choked. He adjusted his tie, a subconscious habit meant to regain composure. But it didn't help this time. "There must be a mistake," he said hoarsely. "Rerun the tests." "We've run them 3 times, sir," Dr. Cohen replied, his voice full of regret. "There's no error. I know this is hard to accept, but please don't talk to me about acceptance." William cut in, his voice sharp, though it barely concealed his desperation. "How much will it cost to fix this? 1 million? 10 million? Name your price, doctor. There must be a way. A trial. Some experimental procedure." The doctor sighed. "Mr. Harper, some things can't be bought, but we can explore other options, like adoption or—" William ended the call. His hand slammed down on the desk, sending his Mont Blanc pen to the floor. Adoption? The idea felt like a bitter joke. The Harper bloodline couldn't end like this. His father, who had worked himself to the bone building this empire, once said, "A man without a child is a man without a future." That sentence now echoed in William's mind like a curse. He stood up, his tall figure reflected in the glass wall. The man in the reflection looked like a stranger. Silver in his sideburns, fatigue in his blue eyes, jaw clenched, as if carrying the world's weight. He couldn't stay here any longer. He needed air. He needed to escape, to forget the truth that was suffocating him. William grabbed his coat and car keys. The private elevator took him to the basement, where his gleaming Porsche 911 Turbo waited under the fluorescent lights. He slid into the driver's seat, surrounded by the scent of premium leather, but it brought no comfort. The engine roared, and he sped into the rain, the streets of Manhattan blurring into a gray haze. William's mind was a storm. For years, he had followed a meticulous plan: expand Harper Global, conquer new markets, build an immortal legacy. But now, it all collapsed. Without a child, without an heir, everything was meaningless. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. Control, the very thing that had defined him, was slipping through his fingers like water. At an intersection, the traffic light turned red. William didn't see it. His mind was trapped in a looping echo of the doctor's words. Irreversible. A blaring car horn snapped through the moment, but it was too late. A truck plowed into him, metal crashing in a deafening screech. The Porsche spun, glass shattering, the world slowing down like a nightmare on film. William felt his body jerk violently, blood trickling down his forehead. And then, darkness swallowed him. In that final moment, he thought of his father, the Harper legacy, and a nameless ache. He didn't know that, at that very instant, fate was preparing to bring a woman into his life. Someone who would redefine everything he thought he knew about family and love. Rain poured over Manhattan like a gray curtain, drowning out every sound of the city in a constant downpour. Near the intersection of 42nd Street, William Harper's Porsche 911 Turbo lay twisted and mangled like a wounded beast, smoke rising beneath flickering streetlights. Shattered glass, contorted metal, and the thick stench of gasoline filled the air. Inside, William was unconscious, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead, his body pinned under the deformed driver's seat. The blaring horn of the truck faded into the distance, leaving behind a scene of chaos and a fragile moment between life and death. Grace Turner, a 35-year-old black schoolteacher, had just finished her shift at a Bronx community center and was on her way home. She walked briskly beneath a small umbrella, her thin coat soaked through, curly hair tied high and bouncing with each step. Her brown eyes, usually bright when telling stories to her students, squinted now against the relentless downpour. When the piercing sound of the crash rang out, she stopped, her heart pounding. Without hesitation, she ran toward the smoking car, her umbrella falling to the sidewalk, carried away by the wind. "Hold on! I'm getting you out of there!" Grace shouted, her voice cutting through the rain and groaning metal. She dropped to her knees beside the crumpled car door, her small hands pulling hard at the frame. Sharp shards of glass sliced into her palms, her blood mixing with the rain. But she didn't stop. Through the shattered window, she saw William, a stranger, brown hair matted with blood, eyes tightly shut. Something about him made her act like a whisper from her heart insisted, "He needs you." Gritting her teeth, Grace summoned all her strength to pry the door open. "Don't give up, please," she murmured, partly to him and herself. A small flame flickered from the engine, the gasoline fumes growing stronger. She knew time was running out. With one final cry, she tore the door open, the metal groaning in protest. Grace reached in, unbuckled the seatbelt, and dragged William from the seat. He was heavier than she expected, his tall frame collapsing over her shoulder, but she didn't quit. Her blood stained his shirt as she stumbled back, dragging him away from the wreck. Seconds after they collapsed onto the sidewalk, the fire ignited, consuming the Porsche in a low explosion. Grace wrapped her arms around William, shielding him from flying debris. She gasped for breath, heart pounding, but her eyes never left the unconscious man. She whispered that "You're safe now," but she wasn't sure he could hear. William's blue eyes twitched slightly, but remained unconscious, his face pale under the streetlight. In the distance, the wail of sirens drew closer. Grace sat in the rain, still clutching William's hand, as if trying to give him some of her warmth. She didn't know who he was, didn't know he was the billionaire at the helm of Harper Global, a man revered across New York. He was just someone in need, a soul hovering on the edge of her. Firefighters and medics arrived, quickly lifting William onto a stretcher. A nurse began wrapping Grace's bloodied hand, but she shook her head when asked to ride in the ambulance. "I'm fine," she said, her voice raspy. Just take care of him. Grace stood in the rain as the ambulance drove off, watching the red lights disappear. She picked up her broken umbrella, now nothing but a bent frame, and walked away. She didn't think about thanks or reward. Her action came from the heart, a lesson her late mother, a nurse, had once taught her. When someone needs help, don't turn away. But as she stepped into her small Bronx apartment, her hand still bleeding, she couldn't shake the image of those blue eyes from her mind. Something about him, a silent pain, left her feeling an inexplicable connection. At Presbyterian Hospital, William drifted in and out of unconsciousness. The image of determined brown eyes and a gentle yet powerful voice repeated in his mind. Hold on, that voice echoed, pulling him back from the darkness. When he opened his eyes, the white hospital lights made him squint. A nurse stood beside him, checking the heart monitor. Welcome back, Mr. Harper, she said softly. You had us all worried. William tried to speak, but his throat was dry. The image of the woman in the rain came back with clarity, like a beacon through fog. The woman who saved me, he whispered, voice frail. Where is she? The nurse smiled. Grace Turner. She saved your life, Mr. Harper. The car caught fire just seconds after she pulled you out. An absolute miracle. Grace Turner. Her name rang in William's mind like a prayer. He didn't know who she was, but knew he owed her his life. At that moment, surrounded by the steady beep of the heart monitor, William felt a flicker of light spark in a long heart turned cold. She hadn't just saved him. She had opened a door he never imagined he would walk through. The white light of the hospital room at Presbyterian Hospital was blinding, but William Harper didn't mind. He lay in the bed, his body sore, bandages wrapped around his chest, and a heavy plaster cast on his leg. The steady beeping of the heart monitor was a monotonous rhythm, reminding him that he was still alive. But his mind wasn't here, not in this sterile room or the physical pain. It was pulled back to the last moment before darkness had consumed him. The steadfast brown eyes, the gentle yet firm voice. Hold on. The image of that woman, Grace Turner, was like a beacon of light piercing through the fog in his soul. William, 40 years old, had never believed in miracles. To him, everything in life had a price. A contract, a number, a deal. But Grace Turner had saved him, not for money or fame, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Her name, mentioned by the nurse, echoed in his head like a promise. He needed to meet her and thank her, even though deep down, he knew words couldn't repay this debt. Nurse, William called, his voice hoarse, weaker than he expected. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile, turned to him. Grace Turner. How is she? Was she injured? Ms. Turner is fine, Mr. Harper, the nurse replied, adjusting the IV drip. She only had a few cuts on her hands, nothing serious. She left the hospital right after she found out you were all right. William furrowed his brow. She left? Didn't leave any contact information? The nurse shook her head. She just said, take care of him. A special person, Ms. Turner. Special. That word didn't do her justice. William felt a strange compulsion, a feeling he wasn't familiar with, a gratitude that couldn't be expressed. He needed to find her, not just to thank her, but to understand why her actions had made him, the man who always controlled everything, feel so small and vulnerable. The next morning, as Emmeline Gwynn, William's efficient assistant, entered the hospital room with a stack of documents, he cut her off before she could report on the status of Harper Global. Emily, find someone for me. Grace Turner, a teacher from the Bronx. She saved me in the accident. With her black hair neatly tied back and thin-framed glasses, Emily quickly jotted down notes. "Got it, sir. Do you need to send a thank you gift or—" "No," William interrupted firmly. "Not a gift. I want to meet her. Find her now." Emily nodded, not asking further questions, though her eyes showed mild surprise. William Harper wasn't easily shaken, but this time, his voice was different. 3 days later, William was allowed to leave the hospital, though he still needed a cane to walk. He declined the company car, choosing to rent a sedan and drive himself to the Bronx, a place he rarely visited except for real estate investment reports. The streets of the Bronx were a far cry from Manhattan. Children played soccer on the sidewalks, small shops with handwritten signs lined the streets, and there was a vibrant community atmosphere he had never experienced. Public School 214 appeared before him, an old brick building brimming with life. Emily had given him a heads up, but William still felt nervous as he stepped into the school hallway, the children's laughter echoing around him. A secretary led him to the teacher's lounge, where Grace Turner graded papers. She wore a navy blue sweater and a simple pencil skirt, her curly hair tied up high, her brown eyes lighting up as she watched the students through the window. When she looked up and saw William, her expression showed surprise, but quickly softened into a warm smile. "Mr. Harper," Grace said, standing up, her voice both gentle and confident. "I didn't expect to see you here." William gripped his cane, trying to hide his awkwardness. I need to thank you, Ms. Turner. You saved my life." Grace shook her head, her smile still on her face. "Call me Grace. And you don't need to thank me. I just did what needed to be done." "But not everyone would have done that," William replied, his voice more sincere than he intended. "You risked your life. I want to repay you." Grace tilted her head, her gaze mischievous. "Repay me? Mr. Harper, I don't need money or gifts. If you want to thank me, live well. That's enough." Her words hit William like a soft punch to the chest. In his world, everything had a price. A payment, a contract, an expensive gift. But Grace had refused all of that without hesitation. He looked at her, this woman standing in the room full of students' assignments and chalkboards, and felt a strange respect. She hadn't just saved his life. She was challenging how he viewed life. "Well, at least let me take you to dinner," William said, his voice tentative. "It is not a repayment, just a proper thank you." Grace looked at him, her eyes scrutinizing as if trying to read his thoughts. After a moment, she nodded. "All right, but I choose the place, a small diner in the Bronx. It's not one of those fancy Manhattan restaurants." William smiled, the first genuine smile in days, a sense of relief spreading through him. "I agree, Grace." As he left the school, the afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees on the Bronx streets, and William felt a slight shift in his heart. Grace Turner wasn't just the woman who saved him from a burning car. She was the one who had made him question everything he had ever believed in. And in that moment, he knew this meeting wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a journey he had never prepared for. The small diner in the Bronx, named Mama's Kitchen, sat nestled between a row of shops on Grand Concourse. The warm yellow light spilled out from the windows, mingling with the scent of cornbread and fried chicken wafting from the kitchen. William Harper walked in, feeling out of place in the simplest suit he owned. A suit still worth more than many people's monthly salaries here. He leaned on his cane, his steps still limping from the accident, but his blue eyes lit up when he saw Grace Turner waving lightly in the corner. Grace wore a white shirt and jeans, her curly hair flowing down, her brown eyes sparkling under the light. In front of her was a homemade lemonade, and she was laughing with the waitress, an older woman who called her Gracie. William sat across from her, feeling the stark difference between this place and the Michelin star restaurants he frequented. No silk tablecloths, no $100 wine glasses, just diners laughing and the soft jazz music from an old speaker. "How does it feel to be away from Manhattan, Mr. Harper?" Grace asked, her voice playful, pushing the menu toward him. "Call me William," he replied, smiling. "And it's strange, but not bad. Do you come here often?" "Since I was little." Grace said that her eyes have softened, as if recalling something. "My mom used to bring me here after long shifts at the hospital. She said the food here feeds the soul." William nodded, feeling the warmth in her words. He ordered the fried chicken and mashed sweet potatoes, following Grace's suggestion. And when the food arrived, he was surprised by how delicious it was. They started talking initially about simple things, favorite music and favorite movies. But as the lights dimmed and the restaurant quieted, their conversation deepened. Grace talked about her teaching job at Public School 214 and her students, children who grew up in hardships but were full of dreams. "There's a boy, Jamal, who wants to be an astronaut," she said, her eyes lighting up. "He draws the galaxy on his desk. I want them to know that dreams have no limits, no matter where they come from." William listened, captivated by her passion. He had never thought much about education or community like this before. In his world, everything revolved around profit, stocks, and power. "You make me feel small," he admitted, his voice low. "I've never considered changing someone's life other than signing contracts." Grace tilted her head, her gaze inquisitive but not judgmental. "You, William, you have an empire. Don't you think it could do something bigger, like helping kids like Jamal?" Her words left William speechless. He thought about Harper Global, the vast numbers, the deals he had made. What was it all for? To continue a legacy that, now with the news of his infertility, he knew would have no heir. He took a deep breath, finally opening up about the obsession that haunted him. "I just found out I can't have children," he said, his voice hoarse, his eyes downcast at his glass of water. "I've spent my life building everything to carry on the Harper name, but now it feels like a joke. I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Grace placed her hand over his, a gesture gentle but powerful. "William, I'm sorry, but my mom used to say family isn't just about blood. It's about the people you choose to love and take care of. Your legacy isn't in the name, but in what you leave behind for the world." Her words were like a breeze blowing through William's dry soil. He looked at her, this woman with a genuine smile and an open heart, and felt a spark of hope. Everything could be bought in his world, but Grace was teaching him that the most valuable things, kindness and understanding, had no price. They left the diner when it was late, walking on the Bronx sidewalk under the dim moonlight. William talked about his childhood and strict father who always set high expectations, and he felt no judgment for the first time. Grace shared about her mother, a nurse who had sacrificed her whole life to raise her, and her dream of building a community library to continue her mother's legacy. "I want the children here to have a place to dream," she said, her voice filled with determination. When they parted in front of Grace's apartment, a small flat in a red brick building, William felt his heart lighter. "Thank you, Grace," he said, "not just for the dinner, but for everything. I never thought a meal could change my perspective." Grace smiled, her gaze warm. "There's a lot more to learn, William. Let the Bronx teach you." He drove back to Manhattan, the city lights sparkling as they always did, but William didn't feel alone this time. With her kindness and sincerity, Grace Turner had planted a seed in his heart, a seed of change. He didn't know where it would lead him, but for the first time in his life, he was ready to walk forward without controlling everything. The afternoon in Harlem was fabulous, with soft golden sunlight filtering through the trees along Lenox Avenue. casting patches of light and shadow across the sidewalk. William Harper and Grace Turner sat in a small cafe called the Corner Brew, where the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with soul music playing from a wall-mounted speaker. No longer using a cane, William wore a dark blue shirt and simple trousers, still feeling slightly out of place in this cozy space. Grace, in a beige maxi dress and loosely tied curly hair, looked comfortable, but her brown eyes today were contemplative. They had met several times since that dinner at Mama's kitchen, each meeting stretching for hours with conversations about life, dreams, and scars that weren't easy to share. William had gradually grown accustomed to Grace's sincerity and the way she made him feel that he didn't have to be Mr. Harper of Harper Global, but William. But today, he noticed a difference in her, a hesitation as if she were carrying a heavy secret. "Grace, are you all right?" William asked, his voice deep, as she stirred her chamomile tea absent-mindedly. Grace looked up, a faint smile crossing her face. I'm fine. There's something I need to tell you, but it's not easy." William leaned forward, his blue eyes filled with concern. "You know I'm always here to listen, whatever it is." She took a deep breath, her hands tightening around her teacup as if searching for the courage to speak. "William, I'm pregnant. Twins. I found out a few weeks ago and I'm still trying to come to terms with it." The air seemed to stop moving. William froze, feeling like he had been pulled into a completely different world. He looked at Grace, her gaze now filled with mixed emotions, both strong and vulnerable. "Grace, that's great news," he said, hesitating, trying to find the right words. "But why do you look worried?" Grace bit her lip, her eyes drifting toward the window where children played jump rope. "Because this isn't a simple story. The father of the babies is not in the picture, and I want it that way." William stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. He could feel the deep pain in her voice, a story left untold. After a moment, Grace turned back to him, her voice trembling lightly. "David, my ex-fiancé, passed away 2 years ago in a car accident. I fell apart. One night, a few months after his memorial, I ran into an old friend of David's at a bar. We had drinks and talked about David and the loss. Then, things happened. The next morning, he left a note saying he was moving to Seattle and couldn't face David's memories here in New York. He doesn't know about the babies, and I'm not planning to find him." William felt his heart tighten. He thought about his accident, about how Grace had saved him, and now he understood why she had acted without hesitation. She had similarly lost David, and perhaps saving him was her way of confronting that pain. "Grace, I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You've been through so much." Grace shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears but still resolute. "I'm not telling you this, so you'll pity me, William. You deserve to know, because we're getting closer." William took her hand naturally. This time, she didn't pull it away. "I don't pity you, Grace. I respect you. But let me help. I want to repay you, not because I care." Grace looked at him, her gaze scrutinizing, as if she wanted to ensure his words were genuine. "William, I don't need help, financially. I've been independent since my mother passed. I'll raise my kids, no matter how hard it gets." "I know you're strong," William replied, his voice sincere. "But no one has to do everything alone. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about being there for you as a friend if you allow me to be there." Grace smiled, a smile that was both sad and hopeful. "You're a strange man, William Harper. A billionaire wanting to be friends with a teacher in the Bronx." William laughed, the tension finally easing for the first time that afternoon. The Bronx may be teaching me more than I thought. They left the cafe as dusk fell, the orange light spreading over the Harlem streets. William drove Grace home, chatting about lighter topics, the names of the babies and the books she wanted to read to them. But in his heart, the news of Grace's pregnancy felt like a wave, turning everything he had ever thought about the future upside down. He wasn't the baby's father, but the thought of Grace facing this journey alone made his heart. And deep down, he felt a strange longing, not to control, but to walk beside her. When they said goodbye in front of Grace's apartment, a small flat in a red brick building, she held his hand momentarily. "Thank you, William, for listening." "Thank you, Grace," he replied, his eyes warm for trusting me. On his drive back to Manhattan, William drove slower than usual, his mind filled with images of Grace and her story. She had opened a world he had never known, a world of resilience, difficult choices, and love that transcended loss. He didn't know where it would lead him, but he felt ready to walk beside her for the first time, even if only as a friend. The autumn in New York brought a chill in the air, wrapping the streets of Harlem in hues of gold and red from the fallen leaves. William Harper and Grace Turner walked along the sidewalk, the soft afternoon light fading, casting a thoughtful expression on Grace's face. They had just left the corner brew, where Grace had shared her secret about the pregnancy. William could feel a shift in the air between them. Not a distance, but a new tension, as though the outside world was creeping into their private moment. He wore a simple wool coat, trying to blend into the Harlem space, but his eyes betrayed his worry as he saw Grace pull her scarf tighter around her shoulders. The rumors about them spread like wildfire. Tabloid newspapers in Manhattan began publishing sensational headlines. "Billionaire Harper, dating poor Bronx teacher," or "Shocking cross-class romance shakes New York." Candid photos, William dropping Grace off at her apartment, the two laughing at the cafe, flooded social media. Cruel comments poured in, from questioning Grace's motives to racially derogatory remarks. William used to media attention and tried to ignore it, but he saw the weight in Grace's eyes growing heavier each day. At Public School 214, Grace faced scrutinizing stares from colleagues and students. One morning, she overheard a group of students whispering, "Is Ms. Turner going to be a queen soon?" Another teacher, though friendly, asked, "Are you planning to move to Manhattan, Grace?" Those seemingly innocent questions felt like daggers to her self-esteem. Grace, who had spent her life building a reputation as a dedicated teacher, now thought she had been turned into a character in someone else's story. That afternoon, in a small park near the school, Grace and William sat on a wooden bench, surrounded by the fallen autumn leaves. William noticed her unusual silence. "Grace, is something wrong?" he asked, his voice low, his hand instinctively gripping the edge of the bench. Grace sighed, her brown eyes gazing into the distance. "William, everyone's talking about us, not just the press but my students and colleagues. They think I'm an opportunist, a black teacher trying to trap a white billionaire." William felt his blood rise to his face. "They don't know you. They don't understand that we're just friends." Grace cut him off, her gaze sharp but not angry. "William, even friends make people ask questions. They don't see me. They only know the story they want to believe. About class, about race. I've spent my whole life proving who I am, but now I feel like I'm losing that." Before William could respond, an unexpected event made everything worse. Olivia Harper, William's sister, showed up at the school the next day. She was dressed in an expensive business suit, her cold eyes piercing as she walked into Grace's classroom right after school hours. "Ms. Turner," Olivia said, her voice sweet but chilling, "I'm here to talk about my brother." Grace stood straight, her hands gripping a stack of papers on her desk. "If it's about William, you can speak to him." Olivia smiled, pulling a check from her purse. "You're a wise woman, Ms. Turner. Surely, you understand that this relationship isn't appropriate. Here's a sum of money, enough for you to start over, anywhere, with your children." Grace looked at the check, her heart racing. Not from temptation, but from the insult. She pushed the check back toward Olivia, her voice calm but firm. "Ms. Harper, I don't need your money, and I don't require you to define what's appropriate for me." Olivia frowned but didn't argue. She left Grace alone in the classroom, her hands trembling slightly. When William came to pick her up that evening, he immediately noticed the tension on her face. "Grace, what happened?" he asked, stopping the car by the curb. "Your sister," Grace replied, her voice shaking. "She came to the school and offered me a check to stay away from you. She said she's protecting the Harper family." William gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes darkening. "I'll talk to Olivia. She has no right." "It's not just your sister," Grace interrupted, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's the whole world out there, William. They look at us and only see the differences. You're a white billionaire. I'm a black teacher, pregnant with another man's child. I don't know if I can handle all of this." William felt his heart clench. He wanted to hold her, to promise that he would protect her, but he knew it wasn't that simple. "Grace, I don't care about them. I care about you." Grace turned to him, her eyes both pained and resolute. "But I care, William. I live in this world, and I face these whispers every day. I need time to think and to know if I can keep going for myself and my children." William nodded, even though each of her words felt like a knife. "I'll respect that," he said, his voice hoarse. "But let me know when you're ready." They parted in silence under the dim streetlights of Harlem. Grace walked into her apartment, closing the door behind her, feeling the weight in her heart. She placed her hand over her belly, where two small lives were growing, and whispered, "Mom will be strong for you both." William drove back to Manhattan. The city lights were sparkling but cold. For the first time, he realized that battles couldn't be won with money or power. Battles of the heart, prejudice, and... The autumn in the Bronx laid a warm-colored blanket over the streets, where the red maple trees mixed with the old brick buildings. Grace Turner walked into the Marcus Garvey Community Center, a place as familiar as her second home. Grace needed a place to regain her balance after the tense encounter with Olivia Harper and the pressure from the whispers of the outside world. She wore a long gray sweater and leggings, her curly hair tied up high, her brown eyes reflecting a tiredness, but still a sense of resilience. The center, with its warm-colored walls and the sound of children laughing, was where she found strength. Maya Jackson, a longtime friend of Grace, stood at the reception desk, guiding a group of children in painting a mural. With a bright smile and neatly braided hair, Maya spotted Grace and immediately embraced her. "Gracie, my girl," Maya said warmly. "You look tired. Are those rumors in the papers bothering you?" Grace sighed, sitting down on an old plastic chair. "It's not just the press, Maya. The whole world is looking at me like I'm an opportunist. William's sister even offered me money to stay away from him." Maya frowned, placing her hand on Grace's shoulder. "You're Grace Turner, who's made this neighborhood proud. Don't let them define you. Just be yourself, like your mother taught you." Maya's words were like a soothing breeze to Grace's heart. She thought of her mother, the nurse who had spent her life caring for others, constantly reminding her that the community is where you find strength. Today, Grace was there to help organize a reading session for children, a project she and Maya had started to encourage a love for literature. As she arranged the books on the table, a familiar student, Jasmine, walked in. The 12-year-old girl, with her hair braided into two sides and a bright spark in her eyes, carried a stack of papers. "Ms. Turner!" Jasmine exclaimed, handing Grace an essay. "I wrote about family as you asked. Please read it." Grace opened the essay, her eyes lighting up as she read the carefully written lines. Jasmine wrote about how family wasn't just about blood, but about those you choose to love, drawing inspiration from both Grace and William. Jasmine wrote that you and Mr. Harper showed me that family can be anyone as long as they are there for each other. Grace felt tears well up, but she smiled and hugged Jasmine. "You're so special, Jasmine. Thank you." That afternoon, William Harper unexpectedly appeared at the center, surprising everyone. He wore a t-shirt and jeans, starkly contrasting his usual suits. He came at Grace's invitation, wanting to participate in a volunteer project to repaint the center's wall. As he walked in, a can of paint in hand, a few kids giggled when he accidentally spilled some paint on his shirt. William was used to luxurious boardrooms and felt awkward but smiled, trying to fit in. "William, are you sure you want to do this?" Grace asked, her eyes playful as she saw him clumsily holding the paintbrush. "I want to try," William replied sincerely. "You've shown me your world. I want to understand it." Grace led him to the wall where children were painting stars and trees. She introduced him to Maya, who patted him like an old friend. "Feel at home, Harper," Maya said. "Here, no one cares if you're a billionaire or not." William started painting, clumsy but focused. He chatted with the kids, listening to them talk about their dreams of becoming astronauts, doctors, or artists. A boy, Jamal, showed him how to paint a perfect star. For the first time in his life, William felt he didn't need to be Mr. Harper. He was just a man learning how to belong to a place that wasn't measured by money. When the volunteer session ended, Grace and William sat on the center's steps, watching the kids run around under the sunset. "This is my world," Grace said, her voice low. "It's not perfect, but it's real. The people here, Maya, Jasmine, Jamal, are my family, even if we're not blood." William looked at her, his blue eyes filled with emotion. "I've never seen a community like this. In Manhattan, everything's a competition. Here, people support each other." Grace nodded, placing her hand on her belly, where two small lives were growing. "I want my kids to grow up in a place like this. But with what the press is saying, and how your sister looks at me, I'm afraid I might lose this." William took her hand gently, but firmly. "Grace, I won't let that happen. I'll talk to Olivia and do everything I can to protect you, not with money, but by being there for you." Grace smiled, her eyes softening. "You're learning fast, William Harper." As they parted ways, William felt a profound change in his heart. The Bronx, with its simple but warm-hearted people, had shown him a world he had never known. Grace became his guiding light with her resilience and love for her community. He didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, he felt he was not only living to continue his father's legacy, but to build something bigger, a legacy of kindness and connection. The morning in the Bronx was chilly, with the early winter sunlight streaming through the classroom window at Public School 214, casting light on the blackboard covered in chalk marks. Grace Turner stood in front of the class, wearing a dark blue knitted dress, her curly hair loosely tied up, her brown eyes lighting up as she explained a poem by Langston Hughes. But today, her body felt heavier than usual. The twin pregnancy at 4 months was tiring her out, and the pressures from the press, coupled with the encounter with Olivia Harper, weighed heavily on her mind. She tried to focus, but a sudden dizziness made her grip the teacher's desk. "Jasmine, why don't you read the next part?" Grace said, her voice weak. Jasmine stood up with her hair braided into 2 sides, but Grace felt the world spinning just then. She staggered, clutching her belly, and collapsed onto the floor, causing panic among the students. Miss Turner! Jasmine screamed, running to her side. William Harper was reviewing a financial report in the Harper Global office in Manhattan, but his mind was elsewhere. Since Grace had asked for time to think, he had respected the distance, only sending brief messages to check on her well-being. He wore a gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, his blue eyes deep in thought. When the phone rang, he frowned as he saw the school's number. Mr. Harper, the principal's voice, trembled, and Grace fainted in class. She's being taken to Presbyterian Hospital. William stood up abruptly, his heart racing. He grabbed his coat and shouted for his assistant, Emily and Wen. Cancel all appointments today, Emily. I need to get to the hospital now. Without waiting for the elevator, he ran down the stairs, rushing to the sedan waiting outside the building. The New York streets were congested, but William didn't notice. His eyes fixed on the road ahead, his mind full of images of Grace. At the hospital, Grace woke up in a hospital bed, the familiar smell of antiseptic making her shiver. Memories of the last days of David, her late fiancé, flooded back. He had passed away in a hospital just like this after a car accident. She had once been pregnant with his child, but lost the baby soon after due to the shock. Her hand unconsciously moved to her belly, where two small lives were growing. "Are you both okay?" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a gentle voice, entered. "Ms. Turner, you're anemic, which is quite common in twin pregnancies. We've given you fluids and prescribed iron supplements. The babies are fine, but you need to rest more." Grace nodded, but the fear still gripped her. She remembered the days after losing David, when she felt she wasn't strong enough to go on. "Thank you, doctor," she said, her voice hoarse. But as the doctor left, she hugged her face, silent tears falling. "David, I can't lose again." William pushed open the hospital room door, breathless from running from the parking lot. He saw Grace sitting on the bed, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Grace!" he called, his voice full of concern. He walked over, sitting beside her, his hand hesitantly resting on her shoulder. "Are you okay? How are the babies?" Grace looked up, her gaze softening when she saw him. "I'm fine, William. Just anemic. The babies are fine." But her voice trembled, and William could feel the deep fear within her. "You scared the hell out of me," he said, trying to smile to ease the tension. "I broke every traffic law to get here." Grace let out a weak laugh, but her eyes were still distant. After a moment of silence, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "David died in a hospital like this. I was pregnant with his child, but I lost the baby soon after. Today, I fear history is repeating itself." William's heart clenched. He understood why Grace was always so resilient, so independent, because she had endured losses that few could bear. He took her hand gently but firmly. "Grace, you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. You and the babies will get through this, I promise." Grace looked at him, her eyes a mixture of pain and hope. "Why are you doing this, William? You don't have to be here." William smiled, his voice sincere, "Because you matter to me. Not because I want to save you or fix anything. I want to be the friend you can rely on." His words were like a warm breeze, gently sweeping away some of the fear inside Grace. She squeezed his hand lightly, for the first time feeling like she didn't have to be strong alone. "Thank you," she whispered. I'm ready to talk again. No rush, but I don't want to push you away." William nodded, his heart lightened. "We'll take it one step at a time, Grace. No need to rush." That night, William stayed at the hospital, sleeping on the chair beside Grace's bed. He told her stories about his childhood, times he'd run away from home to watch the trains, the innocent dreams he had long since forgotten. Grace listened, a smile slowly returning to her face. William looked at her as she drifted off to sleep, feeling a deep commitment. He couldn't promise her the world, but he promised to be there for her, no matter what the world outside thought. The soft golden light of the late afternoon winter sun streamed through the meeting room windows on the 90th floor of Harper Global, where the board members sat around a long wooden table, their cold eyes fixed on William Harper. He stood at the head of the table, dressed in a white shirt and gray suit, no longer the awkward man who had first stepped into the world of Grace Turner in the Bronx. But today, he felt the weight of pressure, not from financial figures or stocks, but from the whispers about his relationship with Grace, the woman shaking up his world. The board chairman, Harold Grayson, an older man with a voice as deep as thunder, spoke. "William, the company's stock has dropped by 4% following the articles about Ms. Turner. Our Asian investors are questioning your distractions." William clenched his fist, his sharp blue eyes flashing. "Distractions?" he repeated, his voice cold. "You're calling my personal life a distraction?" His sister, Olivia Harper, sat at the corner of the table, her eyes worried but her voice still sharp. "William, be realistic. Ms. Turner doesn't belong in this world. The board wants to protect the company's image." William felt his blood rise to his face. He thought about Grace, about how she had stood tall before Olivia in the classroom, rejecting the check with an unshakable self-respect. He thought about the nights in the Bronx, her stories about her mother, about her dream to build a better world. "Grace Turner," he said, his voice ringing out in the silent room, "is not up for negotiation. If anyone in this room dares approach her with insults or money, they won't have a place in this company." Silence filled the room. Harold cleared his throat, clearly unaccustomed to this kind of firmness from William. Olivia opened her mouth to protest, but William raised his hand, signaling that Emily Nguyen, his assistant, would come in with a projector. "I have a proposal," William said, his voice calm yet authoritative. "An educational scholarship program for public schools in underserved areas, inspired by Grace Turner. She helped me build this idea." The screen lit up, showing numbers, the budget, projected social impact, and the potential for favorable media coverage. "We will invest in education, in children like Jamal, who dreams of becoming an astronaut," William continued. "This isn't just corporate responsibility. It's an opportunity for Harper Global to lead in making change. Our Asian investors will like this, won't they, Harold?" The board murmured, a few members nodding. Olivia looked at him, both surprised and displeased, but she said nothing. The meeting ended with a tense atmosphere, but William felt a sense of relief. He had defended Grace, not by hiding her, but by making their story an inspiration. That evening, William drove to the Bronx to Grace's small apartment. She had just been discharged from the hospital after the anemia scare, and he wanted to check on her. Grace opened the door, wearing a loose sweater and leggings, her curly hair flowing down. She smiled when she saw him, but her eyes still held a hint of worry. "William, you didn't need to come all the way here," she said, inviting him in. "I did," he replied, setting a bag of fresh fruit on the table. "I wanted to make sure you and the babies are okay." They sat on the old sofa, the warm yellow light from the apartment making the space cozy. Grace spoke about her mother, the nurse who dreamed of a world without prejudice. "She always said that education is the key to eliminating bias," Grace noted, absent-mindedly touching her belly. "I want my children to grow up in a world like that, where they're not judged for their skin color or background." William listened, his heart moved by her passion. "Grace, today I spoke to the board about a scholarship program inspired by you. I want to make your mother's dream a reality, at least a part of it." Grace looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "William, you did that for me?" He replied sincerely, "For you, and what you've taught me. I used to think my legacy was Harper Global, my father's name. But now I see that the true legacy has changed, just like how you changed me." Grace smiled, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You're making me feel not so alone anymore." William took her hand gently but firmly. "We will face the world out there, Grace. Together. Not because I'm a billionaire or you're a teacher, but because we choose to be with each other." Grace nodded, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Together," she repeated, her voice steady. "But only if you promise to keep going to Mama's kitchen." William laughed, feeling the weight on his shoulders lift. "Deal." The moon hung high over the Bronx sky as he left her apartment. William felt a new sense of clarity. Grace and her dream were not just an inspiration, but why he fought. He didn't promise to change the whole world, but he stood by her, no matter the prejudices or pressures waiting outside. The January afternoon in New York was unusually hot, the air stifling as it enveloped the city. Now 8 months into her twin pregnancy, Grace Turner was resting in her small apartment in the Bronx, where she had temporarily stayed at the doctor's recommendation to be closer to Presbyterian Hospital. She wore a loose white t-shirt, her curly hair tied up high, her hand gently resting on her belly, where Violet and Ivy moved. She smiled, feeling the soft kicks, but a sudden pain made her wince. The pain came quickly, sharp, unlike anything she had felt before. Grace tried to call William, but the phone slipped from her hand as a stronger contraction caused her to collapse. At Harper Global, William Harper was in the middle of a meeting with Japanese investors. His voice calmed as he presented a new scholarship program strategy. He wore a dark blue suit, his sharp blue eyes focused, but his mind wasn't fully there. Since Grace had agreed to let him be by her side as a companion, he had been checking his phone constantly, worrying about her health. When Emily Nguyen, his assistant, knocked and whispered, "Mr. Harper," the hospital called. Ms. Turner was going into labor early, and William felt the blood drain from his face. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to leave right away." Without waiting for a response, he rushed out of the meeting room, hurrying down the stairs to the parking lot. The streets of New York were congested due to a protest, but William didn't care. His foot pressed firmly on the gas pedal, his heart pounding. "Grace, wait for me," he muttered, thinking about her and the 2 girls he had already started to think of as his own. At Presbyterian Hospital, Grace lay in an emergency room bed, her face pale, her hand gripping the side of the bed. The pain came in waves, each stronger than the last, and she heard Dr. Phillips, a stern woman, speak urgently. "Ms. Turner, the babies are coming 2 months early. We need to perform a C-section immediately. Violet's condition is unstable." Grace shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, wait for William. He promised he'd be here." But another contraction came, and she screamed, feeling the familiar fear, the fear of losing those she loved, just like she had lost David and her first child. "My babies," she whispered, her hand clutching her belly. William burst through the emergency room door, breathless from running from the parking lot. He saw Grace, her face contorted in pain and fear, and rushed to her side, taking her hand. "Grace, I'm here," he said, his voice steady despite his heart racing. "I'm here with you." Grace squeezed his hand, her brown eyes searching for comfort. "William, I'm scared." "Violet, she's not okay." William said, "We'll get through this," kissing her forehead through the medical mask. "You're stronger than anyone I know. Violet and Ivy will be too." The operating room was tense, filled with the beeping of machines and the calm voice of Dr. Phillips. William sat beside Grace, holding her hand as she was given anesthesia. "Violet's here first, doctor," Phillips announced. But the silence that followed made William stop breathing. Violet was born, small and fragile, without a cry. The medical team worked quickly, and after what felt like an eternity, a weak cry filled the air. William felt his eyes sting with tears, but he tightly held on to Grace's hand. "Ivy's here," the doctor said, and Ivy's strong cry followed immediately, like a declaration of life. Grace laughed through her tears. "Ivy, just like her mother," she whispered. But the joy was short-lived. Grace suddenly trembled, her blood pressure dropping quickly. "Bleeding!" a nurse shouted. William was pushed out of the operating room, his heart feeling like it stopped. He stood in the hallway, staring through the glass door, thinking about his mother, who had died giving birth to his brother, a brother who also hadn't survived. "No, I can't lose them," he muttered, his hands clenched into fists. 2 hours later, Dr. Phillips came out, tired but smiling. "Ms. Turner is stable. She's a warrior. The babies are in the NICU, but they're strong." William rushed to the NICU, where Violet and Ivy lay in incubators, small but strong. Violet, weighing only 1.5 kilograms, needed respiratory support, but her eyes fluttered open as if to say she wasn't giving up. Ivy, slightly bigger, waved her tiny hands, full of life. William stood there, tears streaming down his face like his heart belonged to these two girls. When Grace woke up in recovery, William sat by her side, holding her hand. "How are the babies?" she asked, her voice weak. "They're warriors, just like their mother," William replied, showing her pictures of the twins on his phone. "Violet's smaller, but she's not giving up. Ivy, she's like a little storm." Grace smiled, her eyes sparkling with tears. "William, thank you for being here." "Always," he said, his voice hoarse. "From now on, I'll never be late for you and the babies." Every night after that, William went to the NICU, reading The Little Prince to Violet and Ivy, his voice helping to regulate their tiny heartbeats. He looked at Grace, who was recovering, and knew that this family, though not bound by blood, was the most precious thing he had ever had. The spring afternoon in New York brought warm winds, dispelling the chill of winter. After 2 months of battling in the NICU, Violet and Ivy, Grace Turner's tiny daughters, were finally allowed to leave the hospital. The sunlight streamed through the windows of Presbyterian Hospital, lighting up Grace's face as she dressed the babies in their small, cute outfits. Violet in a light purple onesie, Ivy in a pink one, a gift from her class at Public School 214. Grace, in a white sweater and maxi skirt, her curly hair loosely tied up, smiled as she looked at her two girls, but her brown eyes still reflected a hint of worry. They were small and strong, but the road ahead was still challenging. William Harper stood outside the hospital room, holding 2 infant car seats, his blue eyes filled with joy mixed with nervousness. He had changed since the day Grace had gone into premature labor, no longer the cold CEO of Harper Global, but a man who had found meaning in the smallest moments, like Ivy's cry or Violet's curious gaze. He wore a light blue shirt with rolled sleeves, ready for this special day. "Ready to take our little princesses home?" he asked, walking in with warmth in his voice. Grace nodded, and a gentle smile was on her face. "I still can't believe we've made it. Violet, she's so small." William set the car seats down, gently touching Violet's hand as she slept peacefully in her mother's arms. "She's a warrior, just like her mother. And Ivy, she has the energy of an entire army." They left the hospital in the bright sunlight, with William driving slowly, carefully, as if he were carrying the entire world. He took Grace to a new apartment in the Upper West Side, near Central Park, a place he had secretly prepared over the past weeks. When Grace stepped inside, she was stunned. The apartment wasn't overly luxurious, but it was thoughtfully cared for. The living room was bright, with large windows looking out over the park, but the nursery touched Grace the most. The walls were painted in soft purple and pink, with a mural inspired by Jasmine's essay, violets and ivy intertwined under a starry sky. 2 wooden cribs were placed side by side, each with a gently spinning mobile, violets for Violet and vines for Ivy. "William, when did you do this?" Grace asked, her voice trembling, holding Ivy tighter. "I wanted the babies to have a special place," William replied, his gaze tender. "And for you, too. Jasmine inspired me. Her family essay touched me." Grace walked over to a corner of the room where Jasmine's essay was framed and hanging on the wall. She reread the words, "Family is not just blood, but the people you choose to love." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she smiled. "That girl, she's going to be a fantastic writer." William stood beside her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Grace, there's something I want to say." He took a deep breath, his voice serious but warm. "I want to adopt Violet and Ivy on paper and in every way possible. I want to be their father if you agree." Grace turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. She placed Ivy in the crib, then took William's hand, her eyes searching. "William, you know they're not your biological children. Are you sure?" William nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I've never been more sure of anything. Violet and Ivy have been a part of me since I saw them in the incubator. I don't need them to share my blood to love them." Grace fell silent momentarily, her gaze drifting across the nursery, where sunlight streamed onto the mural. She thought of David, the friend who had passed, and her journey to get here. "If we do this," she said, her voice low, "I want us to be honest with the girls as they grow up, about their biological father, about our story. I want them to know that family is a choice, just like my mother used to say." William smiled, gently squeezing her hand. "I agree. We'll tell them everything, about David, his friend, and how we found each other. We'll teach them that love is the most important thing." Grace nodded, her eyes sparkling but her smile beaming. Then, "Yes, William, they've already chosen you." That night, as Violet and Ivy slept soundly in their cribs, William and Grace sat on the sofa, looking out at the sparkling lights of Central Park. They talked about the future, the names, the books they would read to the babies, and how they would face the outside world. William pulled a small book from his jacket pocket, The Little Prince, which he had read to the twins in the hospital. "He said we should keep this tradition," his voice catching. Grace rested her head on his shoulder, feeling safe for the first time in many years. "Thank you, William, for choosing us." "No," William replied, kissing her hair softly. "Thank you for giving me a family." As the moonlight shone through the window, William looked at the 2 girls in their cribs, his heart filled with a love he had never known. Violet and Ivy, though not bound by blood, had become his true legacy of love and choice. The spring afternoon the following year brought bright sunshine to the Plaza Hotel, where the banquet hall was decorated like a fairy tale garden. Twinkling string lights hung from the ceiling, and tables were covered in violets and vines, symbolizing Violet and Ivy, the 2 girls celebrating their first birthday. Grace Turner, dressed in a light purple maxi dress, her curly hair flowing down, held Violet in her arms, smiling as the little one waved her tiny hands, trying to touch the flowers on the table. Ivy sat on William Harper's lap in a soft pink dress, giggling as he made funny faces. William, in a white shirt and simple trousers, looked nothing like the cold CEO of Harper Global. He was now a father, a companion, with his blue eyes glowing with happiness. The party was a unique blend of two worlds. Teachers from Public School 214, like Maya Jackson, chatted joyfully with a few directors from Harper Global. Grace's students, including Jasmine, ran around wearing paper hats, laughing playfully. Olivia Harper, William's sister, arrived with two small teddy bears, her eyes now gentler, no longer carrying the coldness from her first encounter with Grace. Olivia said they were safe for kids, handing the bears to Grace, but her voice was somewhat awkward. I did some research. Grace smiled, accepting the gift. Thank you, Olivia. Violet and Ivy will love them. Olivia's change from prejudice to acceptance was a small but meaningful step that relieved Grace. As everyone gathered around the banquet tables, Jasmine, now taller and more confident, stepped onto a small makeshift stage. Holding a new essay, she began, her voice trembling slightly. A year ago, Jasmine started to. I wrote about family, and that love doesn't need to follow the rules. Today, looking at the Harper Turner family, I know I was right. Love is a choice. Waking up every day and deciding to love, no matter how hard it is. Grace held William's hand, tears shimmering as she listened to Jasmine. William gently squeezed her hand, feeling his heart fill. Jasmine continued, I've been awarded a full scholarship to NYU, and will study and get an education, just like Miss Turner, because she taught me that a classroom could change the world. The crowd applauded, and Grace hugged Jasmine, whispering, You make me proud, Jasmine. William watched, thinking about the scholarship program he and Grace had built, now helping students like Jasmine reach their dreams. As the party neared its end, William led Grace to the balcony, where the afternoon sun cast a bright golden hue over Central Park. Violet and Ivy were being looked after by Maya, and they were playing with balloons. William stood before Grace, his hand trembling slightly as he took a small box from his jacket pocket. Grace, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I used to think my legacy was Harper Global, my father's name. But you and the babies have taught me that the real legacy is love, the family we choose to build. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring with a purple stone, the color of violets. Grace Turner, marry me, not because of society or expectations, but because I want to wake up every day beside you, Violet and Ivy, for the next 100 years. Grace stood still, tears rolling down her cheeks. She thought of their journey, from the fateful rainy night when she saved him to the struggles with prejudice to when they became a family. She touched her belly, where Violet and Ivy had once grown, and remembered her mother, who had always said, love was the most incredible magic. William, she whispered, there's something my mother left for me. She took a small wooden cross from her pocket, a gift her mother had given her when she was young, saying it carried the magic of fateful accidents. My mother said the best things come from unexpected moments. You are my unexpected moment. She placed the cross into his hand, smiling through her tears. Yes, William Harper, I will marry you. William slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, feeling like the world had stopped. Violet and Ivy's laughter echoed from the banquet hall like a symphony for their family. Olivia stepped forward, smiling for the first time without any prejudice. Congratulations to both of you, she said, her voice sincere. That night, in the apartment overlooking Central Park, William and Grace sat by Violet and Ivy's cribs, reading The Little Prince as part of their tradition. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the mural of violets and vines. William looked at his family, Grace, Violet, Ivy, and knew this was his legacy. Not wealth or power, but love chosen daily. Outside, New York continued to move relentlessly, but time seemed to stand still in this room, preserving the happy moments of a family built from fateful accidents and loving choices.